Probably my fault because I thought we were starting at 11. How silly. Okay, so welcome. Are there any apologies? I know that Gareth isn't here, but I understand he's coming as he's been ill, but he will be attending. Any other apologies? No. Okay.
Just apologies from Rob Barnett from RSM.
Right. Yes, but his colleagues are here. Okay. So, any urgent announcements or items? No. Thank you. Public and press. The last item, I think. Yep. Declarations of interest. Are there any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests?
So, just to note, Chair, that I'm now actually a member of the Joint Police and South Yorkshire Police and PCC Audit Committee. So I don't think that's actually a conflict, but I think people need to note that if we ever talk about merger issues, I've got a foot in both camps.
Yeah. Thank you. Reports and questions from by members? No. Any questions from the public? Good old public. Previous minutes. Are they a correct record? Just sign them as such.
Yes.
Thank you. Any matters arising from those minutes? No, good. Oh, we're progressing well, yeah. Okay, item 8, health and safety. Claire.
Good morning. I'm just presenting this very briefly on behalf of Lynn, who has given her apologies today. She's on leave. She just asked me to bring your attention to the fact that it's the regular report that you receive, and that there was an action from the previous meeting, I think, around incident reporting at Doncaster and trying to get that information. She said that information is now being provided on accidents and incidents from the 1st of July, so it doesn't appear in this report, but it will appear in the next. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we had a discussion last time health and safety came up, and it may not be that you're the right person to pick this up. I think we said last time there was 79% of the items were complete, and there were another like 20% to go, and the position appears to be much the same this time. Right. It was confirmed last time that none of the items were urgent, but obviously being health and safety fire actions, we do need some assurance that they're going to be taken in a timely manner. So can you just note that we could see some progress on that? And one you probably won't be able to answer, but there's a note in it that 11 of the 19 assaults were at Barnsley interchange. I just wondered if there was any particular reason why Barnsley was having problems, or is it just random fluctuations in the data set?
We have had some periodic problems in Barnsley of late. In fact, more generally across the region, there's an increase in antisocial behaviour, particularly in the last few weeks, actually. You may have noted that there's been some service curtailment in the Cernskert area in the evening because of antisocial behaviour. We have put additional resources into Barnsley, so additional customer service, security staff to deal with it. I think it is perhaps being more frequently reported now in terms of even low-level activity, but it's something we're aware of and in discussions with Barnsley Council as well in terms of their ability to support, because a lot of these individuals are known to the council as well. So we want to do a joint effort with them and SYP to deal with the matters at hand. So probably wise for us to bring something more substantive back as part of the next health and safety update in relation to not just Barnsley but also some of those wider antisocial issues as well, I'd suggest.
Thank you.
Can I just ask if those incidents are inside or outside the interchange?
The reported incidents in the health and safety update are all within the interchange device. Right, okay. The ASB issues I'm describing are out on the network, the general network.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Just ask that because I know the environment. And, anything further? Yes, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. On 2.5 in the report, Claire, and I think you probably need to come back to this perhaps, unless Tim knows the answer. It's good to see we've got progress on getting the Doncaster statistics included. In terms of emergency evacuation plans, is that the responsibility of the operator of Doncaster interchange, or is there any responsibility still with us? Because I'm assuming that in terms of providing additional resources and staffing, we've done that, the authority's done that at its own interchanges, but I'm just questioning whether or not that is a responsibility for the contractor to sort out and give us assurances that it works, or do we supervise or review the arrangements at Doncaster?
So it is their responsibility as a PFI contractor to do the work required. Following the conversation we had in respect of Doncaster at the last meeting, I'm meeting with them, I think it's next week, to have effectively a quarterly review with those with their management team. So again, it's on the agenda to pick up there.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Nope. Goody. Item 9, Tram programme update, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for Ellen to get the slides up on screen. I'll take you through. Not dissimilar to Claire, I'm presenting this on behalf of someone who's on annual leave. So Pat Bayer, our Exec Director for Transport, is on leave this week. So I'll take you through the update in terms of our mobilisation and readiness for next March. So next slide, please. In the last meeting, you'll recall we've taken you through some of the facts and figures around where we're at in terms of the tram system as it stands, in terms of the amount of investment, how long the tram system has been in place for, and therefore obviously preparation and readiness for bringing us towards the 22nd of March day, which I'll come on to in more detail in a moment. We've got a detailed mobilisation plan and work packages that capture a lot of the activities, and I'll get in a couple of slides' time. I'll show you some of the progress against some of those activities too, and again mobilising a team. So we have a full mobilisation team now in place. The amount of resource that's committed to that team is increasing when we move into the next phase of the programme, and a lot of those resources will become full-time where they're currently part-time as well. But we've also got additional team within the MCA dedicated to do this work as well. So next slide, please. And again. So it's probably worth saying, I mean, we are actually almost exactly 6 months, so 6 months this Friday, in fact, out from where we need to be in terms of being ready for the migration of operations into the MCA and into the wholly owned subsidiary. What is absolutely clear from the work that we've done, the due diligence work that we've done thus far, is that whilst we will inherit a safe, functioning, operable system, there is a huge amount of work for us to do post 22nd of March in getting us to a place where we build on basics that we'll inherit, but also that we'll start to put in place improvements in terms of the way that the organisation operates both functionally and in terms of how it integrates into the MCA more generally. To that end, we have developed a 100-day plan. So there's a 100-day plan that is going to be used from that 22nd of March. And again, quite common in terms of politicians do this as well, don't they, in terms of having a 100-day plan to implement. But we want to make sure that we start to build on some of the successes that we'll put in place ahead of 22nd of March, but equally allow us to then get a more efficient operation in due course towards the end of that, and then that dovetails into the business plan. So we are in the process of developing a business plan for NewCo, and that will have to come for internal approval within the MCA, and that business plan will then contain some of those efficiency changes that we want to look to put in place as well. That in its own term will then build into a post business plan growth phase, and we'll start to then obviously have iterations year on year in terms of what that business plan develops. The detail will probably sit within the first 3 years substantially of that business plan, although it will be a 5-year plan. Next slide, please, Ellen. So I mentioned again, and apologies for the level of, if you can't, struggling to see the screen, but I'll take you through this in a bit of a level of detail. So we have a number of work packages down the side there in terms of the activities within the programme in its totality. So I'll take you through these, and again, any members wish to ask questions on any of the work stream activities, please do so. Safety and licence, critical. Evidently, we need to make sure that we have a signed off and approved by the Office of Rail and Road licence that allows us to operate the system in the first place. You can't operate without a licence. We've already drafted our own safety management system. We've informally passed the ORR, and we're confident in getting that endorsed and improved well ahead of operating in March. So we'll take a fully fledged version of that to them before the end of this calendar year. So we're satisfied that that process is on track. Legal, contract specification. Again, we've got a transition agreement now in place and signed between us and Stagecoach Super Tram. We'll then develop the work to implement and create as a legal entity NewCo. Again, that will take place in next month, in fact, so by the end of October, and then we'll put in place the necessary insurance and legislative arrangements in place around the NewCo being in existence. Systems and IT. This is a significant piece of work. Again, we are building all of the back office systems, IT infrastructure, HR systems, payroll, all of those other things that are required to support a functioning business. The plan is to have all of those systems ready for testing by the end of this calendar year and start testing in January, February time. That's probably a little bit early in many respects, because whilst we're going to be training incumbent employees of Stagecoach early, we want to make sure we've got the systems ready ahead of time so we can deal with any enforcing issues. Now, the plan for migrating systems into NewCo can be quite flexible to some extent, because they've got their own systems already, but there are some systems which are more business critical than others, so we'll need to make sure that we prioritise both the systems testing and the implementation to ensure that the organisation can operate. We talked about this on Monday. Payroll's the obvious one for me. If you don't pay your staff, you've got an unhappy workforce. So we'll make sure that the systems which are business critical to the operation of NewCo are done and tested, and we'll then have to repeat the testing again when we come to that beyond March. Operations, we've done all of our due diligence work, testing the resources required for delivery. We've commissioned some work to look at service optimisation. That's not something we'll necessarily look to implement from day one, but we want to look at timetables and how resources are deployed within NewCo to make sure that we've got an optimised way of working as well. Engineering, again, not dissimilar. We've done the due diligence. We'll move into the implementation phase of our programme again from October, start to build in place some of the asset strategy and asset work as well. One thing which we are slightly late on at the moment is, so we have a mobilisation plan that captures all of that activity. There is effectively a handback plan that Stagecoach have to prepare for us. They're late on that, but not significantly late, so we are pushing them. Practical reality is the two should knit together very neatly, because everything that we expect to get from them are things that they should expect to give to us in their handback plan. So from that perspective, we're not unduly concerned, but we want to make sure that we still get their plan so we can assess it and look if there's any gaps or variances in expectations as well. People work stream, significant. There's been an awful lot of staff engagement taking place already. We've met with the entire workforce on more than one occasion, right down from shop floor all the way up through the management structure. They are well engaged. I think there was clearly some understandable concerns at the very start of the conversations around this process, but that engagement has been working really well to date in terms of getting staff in a position where they feel able and empowered to ask questions of both the process but also what comes after March as well. So that process is ongoing and will continue, as you might expect, all the way through into March and beyond as well. Within all of that is wrapped up some of the 2P work and all of the necessary legal work in terms of transition of a workforce into a new employer. So that again will take place. And again, as I say, then the 100-day plan and the business plan will capture post-March, improving in terms of capturing new business processes, putting new systems in place which support more efficient business processes as well. Procurement contracts, we've assessed all of the contract and supplier base. We are now in the process of developing that procurement systems and strategies that support that. Again, innovation, stock levels, all of the things that you'd expect as a result of inheriting an organisation as a going concern. All of those things are on track at the moment. Again, as part of the transition plan, we'll make sure that we test those, because inevitably with these things there'll be something in there that you'll want to make sure that just might cause you a bit of concern in terms of whether it's stock levels or a level of assumption. So, but again, from a procurement and contracts point of view, getting ahead of that is important because with T's and C's and with notice periods and termination clauses and so forth, it's important we get those things prepared well ahead of the actual transition date. Revenue and marketing. We are in the process of both procuring and specifying all of the back office and front of house retail systems. So our ability to sell tickets to passengers on board, we need to have our own systems in place for that. New hardware in terms of handheld ticket machines and so forth, but also all of the back office systems that take place as well. We're not going to make any radical changes to the range of products. In fact, probably almost no changes to the range of products that are sold to passengers on day one because we want a nice seamless transition from a passenger experience point of view. So making sure that we've got the agreements in place with the likes of Travel Master as well as part of that process will be important, but again, no reason to assume that those will cause us any problems. Again, in due course, I'm sure we'll start to look at what the wider range of systems and processes and indeed products that come with that will look like. In terms of finance, I think I mentioned earlier the transition agreement, that's now been signed. Obviously, that will then capture all of the requirements in terms of our systems requirements for finance and business processes around that as well, but also in terms of our banking and accounting requirements as well under UCO, and that will obviously be very heavily influenced by our own internal finance function in terms of our expectations of how UCO needs to operate and interface with the combined authority, because the two clearly need to work very closely in that regard. Next slide, please. And I think again. So I don't actually suggest I'm going to go through all of these particular slides in terms I've covered an awful lot of this already, but I think hopefully it gives you a sense that most of the activities are either in hand or have indeed already completed. I've talked about establishing the team, I've talked about the transition agreement being in place, I've talked about the business plans, as that indicates we'll have a 100-day plan and a 2-year business plan to start with, which will be in place by the end of November. Next slide, please. Legal, we've talked about in terms of the importance of making sure we've got the subsidiary established. Again, that will be taking place next month, and I've covered off both the procurements and the safety. I think just on safety, I think probably it needs to be one of the principal concerns of the MCA, and I think that's recognised and reflected by our exec leadership team already. An awful lot of the conversations that we have about this process is making sure that we are completely satisfied that we are inheriting a safe operation, but also that we make sure that we maintain and look to continually improve our approach to safety. You may be aware that relatively recently, and I think since the last audit committee, the judicial findings of the Sandilands incident were found, and the fines applied to both the operator and to TfL. They're front and centre of our minds, not that we think we're in a position in terms of a level of risk that was associated with that particular incident, but we've got to make sure that we're absolutely satisfied that our operations meet the minimum standards, and then we then build on it in terms of our scrutiny of our safety systems more generally. Next slide, please. Talked about the IT systems, I've talked about retail in terms of our approach to vending tickets on board and via off-vehicle sales, so all of those things will need to be ready again by February for us to test and then start to roll out. Talked about the marketing approach as well in terms of campaigning and that year one approach. Next slide, please. Operations, good news actually just very briefly. So we've secured a location in the centre of Sheffield, so whilst most of the staff obviously work from the depot in terms of their start of workplace and end of day, there is a staff accommodation at the moment currently in Castle House in the middle of Sheffield where staff can swap over shifts and have some rest facilities. The contract, the lease on that building ends I think shortly before or just after the end of the concession, so we've already secured some premises adjacent to the cathedral for that as well. So again, in terms of staff engagement, that's good news. We've started to talk to them about that accommodation, and it's actually even closer to the tram stop to allow for switchover as well, so that's positive. I think that is probably, next slide, I think that is the end of the update. So Chair, I'll pause there, welcome any questions people have on what they've heard, any questions about the process and where we find ourselves.
Thanks very much. That was, I think, very comprehensive, Tim, and you've got a I think we all know a huge amount to do in a relatively short space of time, so thanks for all your efforts. I think you've largely answered the question I've got, which was to say, obviously as a citizen of South Yorkshire, you want to be able to get on the tram 1st of April 24, exactly as you did 31st of March, and I'm guessing you're going to tell me you're pretty confident we're going to get
22nd of March, actually.
22nd of March.
Yeah,
okay,
but
yeah.
it'd be even better by the 31st of March.
Yeah. So, all right, but the first day we take over then, you're able to get on it, it still works, you're happy that it's safe, and from finance colleagues' perspective in the room, that it's going to not be a financial disaster when we do that. I think you're telling us that we're on track to achieve all those things, but if you could just say the word yes, that'd be great.
No, absolutely. I think we're exactly where we would hope to be in the process in terms of the due diligence, the pre-preparation work and the mobilisation work. Mobilisation steps up again in October when we start to get into the actual transitionary arrangements in detail with Super Tram. I'm confident where we find ourselves from a safety point of view that we set our stall out. This is what we believe safe operations looks like. This is what we would like operations to look like on day one. And we've already had that conversation with the ORR in terms of our safety management system. They've seen it. They've not signed it off, but they've seen our first working draft, and they've said that they think it's fit for purpose, which is reassuring in itself. So, from a financial risk point of view, we've done the necessary due diligence. We know how much we've got in the accounts in terms of revenue subsidy set out for the first year of operations and future year operations as well. So that's known. And obviously all of the efficiency work that we want to do in that 100-day plan and into year one business plan and beyond should improve on those points as well.
Thank you. Yes. Don't want to get too much into this detail, but in terms of, I know we look at it at a high level, but in terms of the financial risk that we've got, I think it's absolutely true to say that we've got provision for whatever support may be needed when we take this on board. But from our discussions which we had in the Transport Working Group, and more generally in terms of public transport, I think there is, correct me if I'm wrong, Gareth, there is a question of sustainability in the long term. Is that fair?
Yeah, there's a few points, so if I just pick them up in the round. Just, Tim's confident in the position, viewing the world from a pessimistic finance director. What I'd say is that the timeline is incredibly tight, and there is very little scope for bumps in the road and picking it up. And I kind of liken this to jumping from one treadmill to the other, and you need both treadmills in absolute sync to avoid falling on your face. There's a couple of things that are important, and I think this process lives and dies by the engagement that we get from the existing people working in Sizewell. So they are the brains, they are the people who will get the tram out of the shed on day one and run it come what may, regards back office systems and so on. And the really important milestone is that we've agreed the commercial settlement with Stagecoach, and that buys that relationship going forward now, that we will get the necessary engagement, and we will get access to people to work with us and with our concession end team and people like Tim to make sure that they are feeding into the work that we're doing, and that the systems and processes that we set up, they will be able to operate with on day one. So I think that's a really significant milestone, because without that, there would be the real chance that we do a whole bunch of abortive work, and it does mean that we fall over at some point. In terms of the finances, Mike and myself have put in an awful lot of hard yards within the last 18 months, 24 months to position our financial strategy to take account of this risk. And there is now £7 million baked into our transport budget, funded from the transport levy, to support tram operating losses. Now that is a fairly significant investment that was not there in our medium-term financial strategy 2 years ago. So that's an awful lot of commitment from the South Yorkshire leaders to supporting the tram going forward. Now, our MTFS does assume that those deficits start to be made good over time, so it drops from 7 million down to about 6, down to 5 by the end of the decade, there was a key risk associated with all this, that the work that we put into the tram in the next few years associated with the renewals, where we will replace track across the region, where we will replace shuttles, overhead equipment, and we start to address some of the corrosion issues on the trams themselves, cause disruption, that when coupled with some of the patronage issues that we've seen post-pandemic mean that the money that we have put aside isn't sufficient, and that is a latent risk that we've got. And then the growing risk is then that the patronage that we lose while we do the renewal works doesn't come back to the network in the way that we envisage it. So again, that's a key risk. But the real challenge for us is to get the tram back to where it was about 5 years ago, where it was actually turning a profit. So there is the potential for this to be self-sustaining. There is the potential for us to get it back to where it was, but we can't avoid the point that we do need to do a lot of significant disruptive work in the next few years to make it right for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Is that helpful?
I'm sort of like hesitating to say this in case it's a defeatist detail, but I'll say it now. Have you considered in this plan on the last day an early shutdown of service, so that you have a clear evening to get everything up and running on day one? Because it'll be worse on day one if it's not quite right, or it doesn't quite work right, as opposed to a planned handover and transition on that last day or last evening.
So I think one of the things we've worked hard at is the agreement that the transition process itself is seamless, in as much as the day-to-day operations look and feel no different from the people that work on the shop floor, clean the trams, do the engineering work. To them this should feel no different. They should go to bed on the night of the 21st and wake up and go to work on the morning of the 22nd, and their duties and the activities that they fulfil are no different. So in one dimension, there is no more risk in that than any other day that, the thousands of days that have gone before it. Clearly, if we get to a point as we start to move through the transition where that looks to be at risk, then we'll have to build in contingency to deal with that. But the actual timing of the handback is actually at 1:30 in the morning, I think, from memory, such that actually, the last service is run and the first service on the following day hasn't yet run. So it is timed such that it allows us to do that in a seamless manner. The actual risk is if we try and do too much on day one, for me. If we try and be too innovative, change service frequencies, put in, new fares, new products, completely different way of operating, that's when you impart risk into the process. And actually the fact that we've got agreement across the MCA and the Mayor now that actually this is a day one looks no different from the day that went before it process, actually for me is a significant way of de-scoping the risk that I think you're describing.
And so the technology platform on day one is going to be the same as on the last day, or we'll be certain it will work?
In terms of the actual physical operation of the tram, i.e. the stuff that goes in the control room, the stuff that operates the tram systems, no different from those back office systems that I mentioned before. So in terms of things like some of our HR systems, again, we plan to change those, but we'll prioritise those on a risk basis and only change them when we're ready and the staff are ready to adopt them, because Sizewell have been running their systems as is now for the last 20 years. Now, in many ways that's part of the problem, is that they've got systems which are probably quite old and could do with replacing. But that doesn't mean that we have to have them change for day one unless we have to. The retail systems is probably one of the only systems that requires that change, because their current retail systems are hard-coded into Stagecoach Group, and we can't lift and shift those out into the new code, so having to put our own in. But we're doing the testing on those early enough in the new year, in essence, to make sure that we're ready for day one. And we've got some contingency built into our plans about actually, inheriting kit from other systems as well, if we so need to do.
Most of the back office systems offer an opportunity to improve on what's there based on what we can see and what we've heard from the team. So getting a modern finance system in place, getting an actual real working asset management system that allows us to properly do plan preventive maintenance, measure life cycles for asset renewal and so on is really important. So that should improve things into the future. And if it's not quite right on day one, it will be a buggeration factor, but not not an absolute killer. I think the revenue system is the key one, the ability to take and receive payment and understand where it's going and where it's up to, and that's the key risk in systems probably.
Just an observation from my discussions, which I've had both with the project director and Tim on Monday as part of the transport group. Very much I get the impression that the project team is working on the basis of evolution, not revolution. There's a high degree of confidence, I think, within the team that they're going to deliver this on time. That's not to say there isn't a heck of a lot of work to do to make this happen. Certainly, I think within the next 4 months, something like that is probably the key phase. But it's being done very steadily, safety first in mind with everything. And they're resisting the temptation from some people to say, well, why don't we do it earlier? For which I agree totally, that I cannot see any benefit of trying to move the date back from where it is, given that everything's structured around. So I think that is the approach that they're going to go for. But we do have to recognise this is a very complex project. As Gareth says, leaping from one treadmill to another is probably not a bad idea. There's a lot of work to do, but there is a lot of confidence in the team that they can do it and they're where they need to be. But it is one of those projects, I think, which you've got to, when we get close to it, and they are looking at it almost on a daily basis, you've got to watch where you are on the plan day by day. And for the cutover, it might well get down into hour by hour.
I'm trying to work out, you see, Chair, whether it's easier to stop one of the treadmills as you step across, or not, or what, or both of them, but anyway, we'll see. Yeah, indeed. You'll probably indeed. Synchronisation might be the answer. That's certainly the ideal. I agree with that.
I think the advantage is, as Tim says, that the tram network does shut down anyway for 3-4 hours in the morning, and that will give you a bit of a breathing space to do things.
Just looking further into the future, we might have a new government, or we'll have a new government of some colour in 12 months' time. Is there any thinking at all going on about expanding the network to get it out to Doncaster, up into the Dearne Valley? I'm thinking both in patronage terms, buy-in terms across all of South Yorkshire, rather than it being seen a very Sheffield-centred system, and our commitment to climate change and not our commitment to climate change, our commitment to net zero to help reduce climate change. Whether, having a fully functioning South Yorkshire-wide tram network that would mean the chair can get on the tram in Barnsley and come here rather than slogging through the traffic would be a bit of a utopia if it's ever financially achievable.
It's long been an issue, what I call the outlying boroughs.
So those ambitions absolutely do still exist. We are progressing business case work on Storing Your Railway scheme, so 2 schemes that could use potentially tram train technology out towards Stocksbridge and on the Barrow Hill line, so at least 2 candidates there that may provide an opportunity to start that process. I think what's important for me is stabilisation of the system as it stands now. We've got to make that investment to make sure you can't build on a system that actually hasn't done the asset renewal and the investment in the first place. We've got to get the basic system fit for the purpose and get it to a state where it can last another 30 years as a minimum, and then put the case to the politicians and to the leaders in terms of what that investment proposal is. It's another conversation with DFT and a potentially future government as well in terms of where we take this from an investment point of view. DFT are very supportive. We had a meeting with some of their senior officials only a couple of weeks ago, and this was one of the subjects that we covered with them as well, because they like longer term both vision but also plans that they can then buy into in terms of investment propositions as well.
Just to add to what Tim said, the leaders have asked us to do that work as well. So we've done some work in the past that we can build upon, but we are looking at all options whether investment into new areas will help drive sustainability on the existing network.
It might also answer some of the questions around the bus strategy as well, if we're able to do that.
Which I think is the next agenda item, is it not, Jim?
Yes, there you go. Good segue, unintentional.
Back to me, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just again to give you an update in terms of where we find ourselves on our franchising assessment process. Before I go into kind of the current state of play, I thought it might be helpful to give a bit of a sense of where we've come from in terms of our kind of our background and lead into this. Again, I'm sure probably none of this is unfamiliar to many of you as members, but we've seen year-on-year decline across the system in terms of bus patronage, even pre-COVID, and obviously that was significantly exacerbated by COVID itself. We've started to come back out the other side of that, but certainly passenger patronage is still only forecast to get to around about 66 million trips per year in the next year or so, and that's a drop from anywhere up to 110 million going back a decade or more. So, you know, it's been a significant drop off, whichever way we look at it in terms of levels of demand. That inevitably, given the deregulated market we find ourselves in, has meant that operators have started to cut their own routes, started to, you know, condense the times of operation, look to shorten routes and focus on the areas that still maintain a level of profitability for them. And that in itself has meant that the MCA has had to step in and start to spend more money in terms of buying back services that were no longer commercially viable, buy back either entire routes or early mornings, late evenings, days of the week, potentially Sunday services and so forth. So, you know, the MCA's commitments in terms of levels of revenue subsidy have gone up year on year. Pre-COVID we were spending around about £7 million a year gross on tendered services. We are forecasting to get to nearly 19 for the year we're in now, so to give you a sense of the scale of increase. And throughout that, the actual amount of mileage, the amount of services that are operating across the network keep going down. So we've seen around about a 35-36% change in the total mileage operated, i.e. the amount of systems operated since pre-COVID as well. So all of this is, you know, is a difficult position to find the system in terms of its sustainability, but again, you know, predicating absolutely the need to then do the franchising assessment work to understand, you know, what benefits that might give us over the current arrangements. So next slide, please, Ellen. So you'll recall, hopefully, again, when information's been shared and discussed on this in the past, we've already gone through the process of approving the case for change, so that happened last October. Our Transport and Environment Board, as was at the time, reviewed and approved that. That led into establishing a team which is now going through the full assessment process, and that assessment is still ongoing. The assessment process itself, clearly, whilst we are working at pace and, you know, faster than probably any other MCA has gone thus far in terms of the assessment itself, it is both a statutory process. You know, there are things you have to do throughout that process which cannot be foreshortened or corners cut. But also you will ultimately still want complete confidence in the outputs of that assessment process, that you trust the numbers tell you the things that you want them to tell you, and it allows the MCA and the politicians to ultimately to make an informed decision on the basis of that assessment. So that is still work in progress. The actual assessment itself will produce, if you're familiar with the 5-case business model approach, it'll, can you jump onto the next slide, please? Sorry. It'll you know, produce information in each of these cases, so it'll talk about that strategic case, and again some of the kind of the background I've described around the current market and the current levels of support required in a deregulated market will you know, feed into that. Can we afford it? Does it produce value for money? What's the level of risk associated with the commercial case in terms of operations relative to the current market? And what does it mean for the combined authority, but more generally for the system as a whole in terms of our ability to manage the process in totality. Ordinarily, business cases of this type, they're not uncommon, and you know, effectively entirely compliant with DFT's requirements, They would ordinarily go to the department for approval. This business case will come to the MCA for approval. So this is not something we have to take to DFT or to government to seek approval for. It can be done by the combined authority. Next slide, please. So again, this might be a bit small, but I'll try and hopefully tell people what this describes. So that business case approach looks to assess various options relative to effectively a do-nothing scenario. And the do-nothing scenario, as it is for this, is where we are now, an enhanced partnership. So that's, you'll see scheme 1 there, the left-hand column, effectively the operators owning most of the depots, owning all of the vehicles, and defining themselves, their commercial network relative to the network that we can afford to buy back through tendered services that we pay for. So that's your do-nothing scenario. There are then 4 other scenarios that we're assessing under the franchised approach, all of which are variations on the theme, either in terms of the depots remaining owned by the operators and the vehicles owned by operators, so we just specify the contract requirements, or a mixture of the combined authority owning both depots and vehicles. And obviously those come with different levels of cost, different levels of risk, but also different levels of benefit as well. So each of those cases, or each of those schemes, is being assessed independently. We clearly have to fix some of the other things. So we've fixed, obviously, the geography, we've fixed the minimum service level, i.e. deliver the franchise system, but only using the network that operates now. So this doesn't include enhancements to the network and doesn't substantially change the mix of the way that operators operate in the region. Although it's likely, obviously, you will only find out whether that is truly the case once you go to market if a franchising assessment is approved. So depending on how many operators choose to, who don't currently operate in South Yorkshire, might choose to come to South Yorkshire when this opportunity is presented. So, as I say, that is all still work in progress. There's still a huge amount of work to do to make sure we're satisfied with the numbers and the affordability process as well. In due course, that will go to the combined authority for decision. Only then, so you can just jump back a couple of slides. And one more. That one. Only then, once that assessment decision has been taken, do we then move into the next statutory phase of the process, which is to take undertake an audit of the actual findings of that assessment, then go into a public consultation process, and only then do you then start to select the option that you then start to mobilise. So that, you can go to the end now. I think that's it in terms of slides. Yep. So happy to pause again, Chair, take questions on the process that we are currently in. Happy to see any of the questions that members may have.
Do we know why patronage has fallen so much? There's almost a vicious circle here that patronage falls, services knock off, services are less frequent, therefore people don't use the bus so much. I'm talking very much from personal experience, and the decline continues. Do we know why it's fallen, and can we reverse it at all, or are we just managing a decline?
So one of the benefits of franchising should absolutely be to reverse that decline, because it gives you the ability to control the whole of the network. So even in the current market, with the levels of public subsidy that we're putting into the system, we only control, i.e. define and specify, about 20 to 25% of the total system. And still 75% of what runs out there today is entirely at the discretion of bus operators. They define the timetables, the routes, the fares, everything else. So we still have a huge amount over which we have no control. Now, once you have total control over that network, because that's what franchising gives you in terms of specifying routes, services, prices and everything else, you then have the opportunity to tailor resources and focus on the bits that matter. You obviously retain the fare box revenue of the routes that are currently profitable, and it allows you to put in place interventions to actually build on that. Now, you need supported policies for that across the combined authority as well, and again, that's will absolutely have to be part of the conversation here, is that we have the local authorities and the MCA with a set of policies that support a franchise network, because you want to encourage people to use the system, not to deter them from it. But absolutely, the current system clearly just does not work in terms of ever reducing frequency or curtailed routes such that people ought to choose to travel by other means.
So presumably the privately owned operated section, the 20% you talked about there, Presumably that does make a profit.
So there are highly profitable routes still in South Yorkshire, absolutely, and the operators clearly want to continue to operate those for as long as they can. The challenge is the levels of reinvestment of the profit made on those services back into supporting the non-profitable parts of the system. And at the moment, that isn't something that they have any obligation to do. Frankly, that's they have an obligation to their shareholders, not to the public purse. So, we have to fill that gap, and that's the from the 7 to the 22 million to 80 million, sorry, that I described earlier in terms of the cost to us in terms of revenue support in the system. So yeah, it's a feature of the system, feature of the deregulated market.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Back to David's original question, though, about do we understand why patronage has fallen off? Have we got any further analysis of those graphs, which are pretty powerful, I think? Could you break that down by a demographic group? Can we break it down further within South Yorkshire to try and get at the answer as why are fewer people travelling by bus?
We have market research, and we do an annual market research process that talks to not just actually bus passengers but public transport users more generally about their motivations for travel, why they travel, where they travel, how frequently they travel, and what stops them from travelling. So we've got that. In fact, the next one I think is due to start in the next month or two. So we'll have some findings from that, and again, happy to bring the findings of that market research back to this group.
And is that reinforcing the point that you made already, that people won't use the bus because they don't think it's frequent enough?
The things that switch people off are frequency and punctuality, largely. So services have to run on time and get them there when they, get them to their destination on time. If people can't rely on a service, then you won't use it. I think so that punctuality is absolutely key. Frequency clearly plays a massive part because, if the times that the buses run don't work for you, and they're only running once an hour, and in fact we're looking to implement potentially 2 hourly services at weekends in October. If you miss that bus by 5 minutes because your shift has finished 5 minutes before the bus goes, you're not going to wait an hour and 55 minutes to get on the next bus. You're going to find another way of getting home. So frequency plays a massive part, but just societal change more generally. Everyone talks about post-COVID changes of people working from home more frequently. ENCTS demand is a massive factor in this. So elderly travel has gone down significantly and shows no signs of recovering to pre-COVID levels of demand. We're at about 65% of pre-COVID ENCTS travel still. And that's a national picture, that's not just South Yorkshire.
Yeah, that's something I remember from the past, whereby the levy was going down because there were fewer
ENCTS, yeah. And that's free, and so if you can't give it away to people that pay nothing to use the service, then it's clearly not an attractive proposition in its current guise.
And how will franchising address the punctuality issue then? Will there be penalties for operators if they don't hit punctuality?
So at the moment, those things are all controlled by the Traffic Commissioner, largely, apart from the contracts that we let. So punctuality and reliability can be fined on, but it requires Traffic Commissioner intervention. We can build some of that into the contracts ourselves. But also going back to the point about supportive policies from the local authority and the CA, it is in all of our interest for buses to run on time. So if we can, make sure that the bus lanes are in the right place, that they're adequately enforced, whatever those interventions might look like, that's in the interests of the system as a whole. And obviously we're inheriting revenue risk as a consequence of taking on franchising. Were we to take that decision, then we've got to make sure that those policies themselves are supportive of that franchise network.
The franchising of itself will not necessarily correct the problems we've got today. We've got to have a variety of things working at the same time.
Correct.
And to bring up control of the whole system, I assume.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And do we have those same graphs for, say, rail, cycling and car travel?
We can probably get them, yes.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful to understand the crucial point about is are people travelling less, so there's a new level that we need to resource for. Because I think that would drive, which I think is perhaps where David was going originally, the point about how do we fix it. Because if we're applying the wrong medicine, we're never going to get the cure to work.
The other thing, I think Gareth is going to come in a minute, but the other thing I would say, in order for us to be able to assess this objectively, we have to fix the level of service. So we've had to fix the level of service as to what is out there now to allow us to objectively compare each of the other options. That's not to say that that is the level of service that we would like to have indefinitely, but we have to assess it against a baseline of the service to fix the other variables. So that's where we find ourselves. That's not to say that, you know, in future, under a franchised environment, we wouldn't want to then increase the levels of service provision or frequency of routes or whatever it may be. But you know, you've got to look at this in such a way that, you know, you understand the true cost of the system.
Because if we don't understand what the latent demand is, and there isn't a latent demand there, it doesn't matter if you double the frequency of services, you're just going to get half as many people on the bus that you had before. And you've then got the problem of trying to resource it, and all the issues about, are you creating more greenhouse gases by running more buses with fewer people on them?
Indeed, but we also know that general levels of road traffic are back to pre-COVID levels, so people are still getting in their cars and travelling. So,
and it's my question about what do the other
and those people present an opportunity to
move back,
onto
the bus.
Correct,
Yeah,
absolutely.
if you've got better punctuality, if you've got better buses. Yeah. Sorry, just one more question, if I may, please. In terms of with the Tram project, I know there's a lot of peer review going in there from other tram operators like Metrolink in Greater Manchester. Have we learned any lessons from Greater Manchester's bus franchising initiative that we can apply
In
here?
a word, yes. In a more expansive answer, we went and spent some time with their mobilisation team a couple of months ago now, I think it was. Did you come, Mike? I think you did, didn't you? Which was really insightful, and they gave us lots of recommendations, lots of things to take away, to think about. You know, they were at the very forefront of this process nationally. They had a judicial review which caused them challenge at the time. They've had their own implementation challenges as well in terms of how they managed to phase and implement it. It is, in fact, this coming Sunday is the day one of operations of the B network. So, you know, we'll all be watching with keen interest to see what day one looks like for them. But yeah, no, absolutely, but equally not just Manchester. So both West Yorkshire and Merseyside are in not dissimilar positions to us, but in slightly different, you know, further ahead. So all of the combined authorities, through the mayors and through urban transport groups, spend quite a lot of time talking about this to try and understand, you know, what's the most optimum way to progress if you take the decision.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just, thanks. It's just a couple of quick points, and I think the questions you're asking, Paul, are exactly the ones we're asking as part of this process. You know, franchising in itself will not drive demand, so but it does give you greater tools. Just a couple of points. Instinctively, as an accountant, I always thought price point would be the key driver of whether someone gets the bus or not, but it's not. And we know that because we give away free transport for the elderly, and they don't get the bus in the same way that they used to. So that's a really interesting one. And I think what it actually comes down to is convenience. So car ownership in South Yorkshire has traditionally been quite low compared to the national average. But what we know is that we have an aspirational car ownership market. So we've seen that car ownership has increased over time as the population has generally got wealthier. So people aspire to have a car and don't aspire to get onto the bus. And they aspire to do that because it is more convenient for them. And one of the reasons it's more convenient is that you can drive into the city centre in Sheffield and park for £4 all day. Things like that. So there are supportive policies that Tim referred to that are really important in this equation. So beyond franchising, what are we willing to do as local authorities to support the use of bus? Because whilsoever it's easy to drive right into an urban centre and park really cheaply all day, that will always be a more convenient approach than standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus to come, regardless of the punctuality and regardless of the reliability. So franchising does give us more tools in the box. It becomes much more helpful to join up a conversation about where we run buses and where we run trams, and that starts to answer questions about the sustainability of the tram system. But in and of itself, it is not all the answer. It just gives us the keys to a toolbox that is much larger than the one that we currently have.
I think the other element of that is not everybody wants to go into the town centre anymore.
Yeah.
People might want to go to Meadowhall, heaven forbid. or places like that. So I think we have to look at the destinations as well.
It's an assertion as such, but and I can speak about Sheffield, but I mean quite literally Sheffield went from the most popular place in the country pre-deregulation to get on a bus, and to one of the least popular places to get on a bus. And I just think it's something to do with we were so successful back in the day. I was a great fan of the cheap fares policy. It was so successful back in the day that comparatively the public have said this is getting much worse, this is getting much worse, this is so much worse that it's now crossed off my list as an option. Just a question, I thought Audit were going to look at in a bit more depth about why patronage had declined. I seem to remember it was on somebody's plan to take a look.
There's a bus data quality audit that's on the internal audit plan that a lot of work has been undertaken.
So that might help us. One of the things is the simplest thing though to me, where I've sort of like always been a franchising fan, and to some extent I'm a franchising fan because that was the only option on the table back in the day. I mean, the legislation didn't particularly even favour franchising at one point, but it certainly doesn't favour municipalisation. It's still not it's still not legal. But the thing about the system that if we control it is basically if the bus is going in the direction you want to go in, get on it, buy a ticket. If you need to get a different bus to finish your journey, get off the bus you're on in a decent facilities and get on another one. So having to change, I mean, changing stations is a deterrent on the railways, for example. As simple as that, even though it's, possibly longer journeys and more comfortable. So thinking that you're not going to get to your destination because you have to change, that's a deterrent, which to some extent we could overcome by having a more integrated network and possibly having buses that go around these, go around towns as opposed to just going straight in. Because at the moment, your incentive, I think, is to come into town, but then to give up thinking about how you continue your journey to a different destination the other side of town. So it's often said, isn't it, in Europe, my son spent a period of time in Dusseldorf. He had a choice of an urban railway, a tram and a bus. They all ran pretty much to time. They all interconnected. It didn't matter which one you got on and which one you got off, so long as you got your ticket in your hand for 2 hours or the day or whatever. That was it. End of the story. That's all you had to do. Just get on what was going your way when it came, and if you needed to change onto a tram, trade, bus, or in some places even a boat, you just do that. And that's such a big barrier, I honestly think. I always feel cautious on these because, I'm in I've got category of one of the people who is cautious myself now about getting on a bus for free. I didn't used to be.
Yeah, thank you. One. I listened to Gareth and Philip saying that the bus into Mayoral or the times and punctuality. But what happens if you haven't got a bus at all? What happens recently, and I'm sure you'll know, that a lot of the bus services are taken away, and we just haven't got a bus in some of the villages in my ward without much notice at all. The notice actually came from the drivers telling people who are using the buses, you won't be having a bus service, so and so. One of the operators just withdrew. The other one, because you're on the periphery, and we're not all Sheffield centric, there's a representation from the 4 areas, and we're out on the perimeter of South Yorkshire, and we used to have buses coming in from other areas, from West Yorkshire, from North Yorkshire. They stopped operating, and the service that was operating within South Yorkshire just walked away. So we're effectively left with no buses at all. Simca stepped in and had one operator, negotiated one operator to provide a route. No consultation locally. The route isn't fit for purpose. It doesn't go in areas that it's needed for people just to get from one village to the next, to go to the doctors, the post office, the shops. But it goes to other areas more regularly. And I keep getting, why do these buses keep going past and they're empty? Well, every 20 minutes they go past, there's nobody on them. But they're not going to other areas where people are saying, how am my father going to get down to the doctors for his doctor's appointment? So, we met with this operator, I won't name them. One of the first comments they made is the route's marginal. So effectively, I think I was saying, stop complaining, or the bus service will go altogether. We have got a meeting locally, which Oliver will be attending as part of his. It's an additional one that's added on, and I suspect it's going to be very well attended and quite heated in some of the questions that are asked. But going back to it, why isn't any consultation had with the areas that the buses are serving? I know you mentioned the market research, but perhaps if you could give us a bit more information of what that's going to be and how you get into it.
In the instance you described, Councillor White, the service in question is commercial. And again, back to the purpose of this discussion, this is about franchising. Franchising will give us the ability to define that service, but because that service operates commercially, the combined authority has no powers whatsoever to instruct that operator to run a particular route at a particular frequency. Their choice. We can try and persuade them, and I agree with all of the points you make. It's clearly not serving the community, but until the operator pulls out of that region completely, only then can we intervene, because we're not allowed to tender services which directly compete with commercial services. And therein lies the problem of the system. Fundamentally, it doesn't allow us to do the things that we would like to do. Franchising does that, and would require an investment to allow us to run the services that your residents expect. That will come at a cost to the public purse, because it will talk of the levels of subsidy required to run services in parts of the region which clearly are not commercially viable. But at least franchising would allow us to reinvest the profitable parts of the system back into this parts of the system that currently don't make a profit.
Franchising will allow us to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and but when we had this meeting, they said, oh, well, we're doing that part of the route because Simca asked us to do it.
Because that is the only choice we had in that circumstance.
But they're not doing the part of the routes that really are essential. But anyway, this is the meeting that we have, hopefully, and I'd like to discuss it a lot further in detail with you, Tim.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, I welcome that. Thank you.
I was just going to remark, because Austin, you've made this point before, and I think it's absolutely right. Franchising could be a solution in an urban setting. For more rural areas, it's absolutely right. It's whether you've got a service at all, and how you begin to coax. How actually you give a service to people who haven't got a choice, must rely on it, need to get to the doctors, and then how you start to build that up a little bit at a time, so that we're not completely car dependent in areas that are not, that are more rural, the fringes of places. I don't mean that disrespectfully by fringe. It's probably a wonderful fringe. Yeah, we can make it happen.
Hello everyone. So there are a few actions from this. In July, the Chancellor visited and announced that South Yorkshire would be the first investment zone in the country, which is a very positive announcement. in fact, that wasn't the completion of the investment zone process. So the government first announced this in March at the spring budget, and they set out a series of what they described as gateways. The first was vision, the second was the lead sector, the third was the geography, the fourth was governance, the fourth was interventions, and the fifth was governance. And when the Chancellor came up, we were partway through that process, and that's reflected in this paper at the moment. So to date, the decisions that have been taken are the lead sector, the geography, and then we have got a long list of ideas that we want as interventions, and we're working through the conversation on governance with the government at the moment. The approach to decision making was taken through a delegation from the MCA board in June. Given the time frames of the gateways set by government, it would have been impossible for us to come to the MCA board for approval on each point. So it was delegated to an executive director team chaired by myself that took the decisions. The decisions were the following. The first was that the lead sector would be advanced manufacturing, given the region's heritage, but that was defined in an expansive fashion. So it was as much about producing technical solutions to complex problems, not simply in the manufacturing sector, but in digital services, in health, in well-being, across a whole number of sectors. The geography, the decision was taken that we would have the spatial core would run from Rotherham to Sheffield city centre. That was necessary because that's where the research assets of the region are held, and it was defined within the prospectus set out by the government that that needed to be the case. We then, to some extent, stretched what the government's definition of an investment of the investment zone geography should be, by including opportunity sites for in Barnsley and for in Doncaster, with special reference to Carcroft Common, which wasn't an opportunity site but is under consideration. And the theory behind the opportunity sites is what this region has been very good at historically, economically, is doing the translational research, but not then translating that into significant employment. The opportunity sites in Barnsley and Doncaster are a huge opportunity because they are large swathes of permissioned or allocated land where you can scale up the manufacturing activity. So on the day that the Chancellor came here, there was also an 80 million Boeing investment, and the hope would be potentially that there'll be manufacturing opportunities that could take place on those big opportunity sites there. The conversation on interventions and governance is ongoing. No decision has been taken yet, but the approach to that decision making will be the same as all of the others. So delegation through to the working group, which will take the decisions and will inform the MCA board in due course. And that's everything that we put in the paper. So we just ask that you note the lead sector, note the geographical focus, note the approach on governance and interventions.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the arrangements for this money, are we at risk of any clawback, or are specific deliverables we have to give for this investment, please?
So there is a monitoring process that the government will take, but that's not yet clear, the format that it will take. The funding doesn't begin until the next financial year. It runs for 5 years. We've decided to take 80 million in flexible funding rather than using some portion of that to tax sites. So we will need to demonstrate that we are spending that 80 million in an effective fashion, which I think we will be able to do. But there's been no statement at this point about clawback.
Thank you.
Like that. My quiet voice again. I'm sorry about this. Did you want to go in?
Yeah, I mean, just 2 points. One to say, well done for securing this money. It's another £80 million for South Yorkshire, and that's got to be a real plus. And linked to Paul's question, really, is yet another thing we've got to do, at fairly short notice with a tight timescale and limited resources. So, you know, how confident are we that we can get this over the line to start in 24, 25? And Paul's covered the other point, the financial risk if we don't.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we feel fairly confident about it, actually. The interventions themselves, which we would plan to spend the 80 million on, build on a series of interventions that went through the business BRG, Business Recovery Growth Board. And what we can helpfully do is use this 80 million to a large extent to build those out. So those programmes, the business cases are going through at the moment. We also have plans to take a portion of the funding, which is understood in terms of the conditions from DLUC, to build a team that will be set up to deliver, and we feel fairly confident we can appoint that team before the programme begins in the next financial year.
Thank you. And there's an allowance for admin in it that we can use.
There is an acceptance that you can take that approach. They haven't specified what the allowance is.
Any more for any more? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll come back to that one.
Thanks, Tom.
Next, we have over the page Gareth, Accounts, and Hassan.
Yeah, I've invited Sam Tompkins, who I think most of you will know, who joined us last time, to speak to this item as well. Thank you. Hassan, would you like to lead off, please?
Yeah, sure. We'll do. Thank you. So at the March meeting of the committee, we presented our audit results report for the PTE and combined authority. So this document is just an update of the report that was previously presented. In the March report, we had as outstanding on the PTE completion of procedures relating to infrastructure assets, and on the combined authority, completion of procedures on the payroll testing of starters and leavers. We outlined that we were waiting for third-party confirmation from in four cases, and that in terms of IS19, that's the pensions liability audit procedures, that we're waiting information from the actuary, and that the completion of grant income testing was outstanding. So those areas have all now been completed. The report identifies that we're waiting for a response from the pension fund auditor in respect of the revised IS19 valuation. We did request for assurances in July. They've got back to us saying that they'll respond by the end of September, and we have been following that up with them, but haven't had a change in terms of that reporting. The unadjusted differences which are outlined in this report are this kind of the same as what was previously which we previously reported in March. So relating to the MCA and PTE's share of an adjustment that was made to the pension fund accounts. And overall, we're proposing to issue as we kind of highlighted in March, proposing to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, and there are no significant weaknesses that we'll be reporting on in terms of value for money arrangements. The opinion for the PTE accounts will include a emphasis of matter, which will just make reference to the disclosures within the financial statements that the PTE functions will be transferring to the MCA. So as this report just really just updates a report that's already come to the committee, I'm not proposing to go through it in any detail, because the key messages are as previously been reported, but happy to take any questions which members might have.
Okay. Thank Thank you. A comment first. I mean, you know, unqualified opinion, no particular matters. So, I think I've said before, but you know, we need to say well done everyone for that. That's a good result. And then just a series of minor questions, a combination of officers and Hassan. Yeah, Hassan, when do we expect sign off? B, are we firm on the January 24 start date for next year's audit? And you know, in the reports themselves, I know the audit's not quite finished, but the fees are always TBC. Will we actually see those and will they come out in public? Or if there's a danger that the reports are issued and we never actually see the fees? And just a couple of quickies for officers. I noticed the accounts have got quite a number of figures in yellow highlighted, which I assume will be taken off before they're just to let us know what's changed. And I just noticed that the post-balance sheet event notes says the statement of account reflects events up to 30th 6/22, but we've actually done adjustments now for pensions and things. I wondered if we needed to adjust that note. So, Hassan, mainly for you, those please. When do we finish?
So
when do we start next year? Do we see
when do we finish? Yeah, sure. So as I outlined, we're waiting for the response from the pension fund auditor, which they said they'll get to us by the end of September. Once we've received that, we'll be looking to conclude this 21-22 audit shortly after receiving their response. That's the only kind of key item that's outstanding.
So sometime in October.
That's what I would like to. Yeah, that's what I would like to the position to be. Yeah, not assuming that they're not reporting on any kind of issues which we need to kind of undertake any additional work for. I'm not anticipating that's the case. So that's what I'd like to do in terms of the completing 21-22 audit. Want to get that concluded as quickly as possible. On the starting of the 22-23 audit, as outlined at the last committee, we did have that planned to be starting in January. Members may be aware of communications which have come out from DLUC regarding the wider public sector audit market as a whole, highlighting that actions need to be taken to address the backlog of audits in order to get the external audit local government market I suppose effectively back on a track which meets governance requirements. The communications that have come out outlines that there are actions which are being proposed. The FRC have been looking at proposals. There have been webinars that have been held with chief finance officers by the FRC. We're awaiting guidance that's we're expecting to come out in terms of September, which authorities will need to consider. We'll need to consider as external auditors as to what that then means for audits which haven't yet been delivered. So there's references to those communications about potentially in terms of a scenario where some form of qualified opinion is issued in terms of audits which haven't yet been completed, in order to get back on track for delivering the 23-24 audit in a timeline which meets overall requirements. As I said, that's all subject to this guidance that's coming out. So once that does come out, we'll reflect on what that means for us, as you'll be reflecting on what that means for yourselves, and then we'll revisit the planned timetable at that stage. In terms of fees, we've highlighted the potential ranges of the fees, and following on from the conclusion of the audit, we'll discuss those with management. If management disagree with the fee increases, then in line with the arrangements, we'll put that to PSA for for determination. Overall, PSA are the organisation that has that needs to approve any fee variations. And on post balance sheet events, was that a question for myself or for management?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, Dave, we've picked up all the sort of changes in the guidance that have been issued subsequent to the original set of accounts being issued. So there's been some fresh guidance on infrastructure assets. So there's a change to the PPE note that reflects that. We've obviously got the updated information from the Pensions Authority about the pensions liability, which reflects the triennial revaluation. So that's been factored in as well. So as far as we're concerned, we've considered and addressed all the events that have taken place since the accounts were first issued. So we're comfortable in being able to update, to change the date on that post-balance sheet events note.
Sorry, Hassan, could I just ask for clarification on what you said? Just check that I've understood this correctly. So I think everybody agrees that we're in a position where we wouldn't want to be in terms of timescale for delivery across the country, not just in SYMCA. You're waiting for guidance from central government about a plan to get us back on track. We had an original start date, which I thought we'd agreed, which was going to be January, was it? January. And possibly I've inferred this incorrectly, but from what you're saying is we haven't got a plan yet that says we are going to hit January, and if anything, I'm getting the feeling that it might be later than that. Have I misunderstood the situation?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that there's so the FRC and DLUC are looking at what needs to be done in order to get audits back on track. And as I said, this is subject to caveats because I'm just speaking in terms of a scenario where guidance hasn't yet been issued on that. But if you look at the correspondence that has come out, there's been references that there may be a scenario where auditors are issuing some form of qualified opinions or disclaimer opinions for audits that haven't yet been completed, in order then to move to a position where I suppose effectively it will be the 23-24 audit can maybe start in a more timely manner, which would enable work to be completed in time, in line with reporting requirements. As I said, that's so what I'm outlining there is based on correspondence at the moment, but it's all subject to guidance that has yet to be issued. So if that guidance doesn't, if there isn't that updated guidance that states that certain actions will be taken by auditors or be considered by auditors in order to conclude on outstanding audits and get back on track for 23-24. So if that doesn't come out, then we'll be looking to undertake the audit in line with the timetable that we previously had. But it's just what I'm highlighting is there's this activity that's happening at this moment in time that might impact on the work that's required for for our 22-23 audit.
Thank you. That's helpful. So if there was no guidance or guidance that said you just have to get back on track and get 22-23 done, then we'd start in January.
Yeah, that's right. So that's our current plans. But if you're looking further ahead, us and again, just kind of like speaking from a personal perspective, us undertaking the audit in for 22-23 in January, realistically, in order to get the for across the market, in order to get audits back on track at the beginning of the new calendar year, auditors would be should be looking to do the 23-24 audit at that particular point in time. But and if the 23-24 audit's delayed, then you'll just keep having a domino effect for subsequent years. So and that's part of all the considerations that are being made at this moment in time in terms of what actions are going to be taken in order to have that reset of the public sector audit market that stakeholders want.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Hassan, just try and nail you down on that point. So if there's no change in guidance, you started in January next year. If there is a change in guidance, that change in guidance will presumably reduce the scope of your audit since you'll be issuing qualified opinion. So that wouldn't mean that you should need to start later than January. It just means you have less work and we'd still get the resources in either then or earlier rather than later. I'm just a bit worried that this uncertainty seems, you're sort of, as Paul says, there's an inference that you might be later because of the uncertainty. But the uncertainty surely just reduces your workload, so shouldn't mean you need to start the audit any later than you already planned.
Yeah,
or missing something.
Yeah. No, that's correct. So in terms of the guidance that that may or that we're expecting to come out, then it will impact on what we need to do, and then we'll be looking to get that concluded as soon as we can. As I said, the aim is to get to a position, or the aim of what's being proposed is to get to a position where the 23-24 audits are starting on a more timely basis. So we're not looking to defer our work. It may be a reduction in what's required. But as I said, that's all caveated with the in terms of what has been communicated at this point in time, and still awaiting guidance for ourselves as external auditors and for yourselves as preparers of accounts across the local government system.
Thank you. And then just following on from David's point about if the guidance was to say, okay, we'll write in effect 22-23 off to get you back on track. Do a much reduced scope of audit work that gives a qualified opinion that says, to the extent that we've tested what we can, we think the numbers are broadly right, although there may be big risks there. That will presumably require a lot less effort from yourselves and other auditors in this market in order to deliver that qualified opinion.
Yeah, that is a scenario that is that's currently being considered. As I said, that's what it's looking like, but until we see what comes out, it is just all speculation.
And presumably that would be reflected in the fees as well. Back to one of David's original points, but we'll leave that debate for later, perhaps. Thank you.
I'm just trying to, perhaps I'm not too clear. I think the questions are about this. Irrespective of how much slack you cut, and it looks like essentially there's going to be a lot of slack cut from the correspondence that we've seen to get you back on track. Irrespective of that, in order to get back on track to some semblance, you have to start in January. You're mobilised to start in January. Is that correct?
So if it was to getting back on track, then in a business as business as usual world, then auditors would be looking to start their 23-24 audit in at the beginning of the calendar year. So in an ideal world, your external auditor would be starting their 23-24 audit at the beginning of the calendar year. Across the system, there are a number of organisations where like yourselves, where there's other years which are outstanding, and it's and what is being looked at is what do you do in terms of those those outstanding years to conclude on those. And once the guidance has been guidance has been issued, we'll kind of consider that guidance, and we'll look to try to get things concluded in order for the auditors of the 23-24 accounts to be starting their work as soon as they can.
Okay, thanks. Just to give some flavour, Hassan's referred to the guidance, and I think in the last committee meeting we appended some of the letters that had come from government about their intentions in this space. I joined a call yesterday between DLUC and the Financial Reporting Council with a number of chief financial officers from similar MCAs and other authorities across the country, and they gave us a heads up on what they intend to consult on in the coming weeks, and that will set the tone for the legislation that they'll need to pass this side of Christmas to get the required statute on the books to change the way we do this going forward. There are two options that DLUC and FRC put on the table, and both rest around what they're referring to as backstop dates. And the backstop date is essentially a point in time at which the auditors will have to put the books down, and if they are incomplete, they will issue what DLUC referred to as disclaimers rather than unqualified opinions. And those disclaimers would just set out why the audit couldn't be concluded at that point in time. Now, this backstop approach is clearly intended to just draw a line in the sand and prioritise the efforts of the auditors and our own teams on the latest information rather than forever chasing our tail over aged information, and that's designed to just break the cycle and get us back on track. Now, in option one, the proposal is that the backstop date for the 21-22 accounts would be the 31st of March 2024, so the March coming, and that's the 21-22 accounts that you've just seen. So we should be ahead of the curve at that point, and hopefully we'll get our accounts approved at November board, and there'll be no further changes required as a result of the outstanding pension information that Hassan referred to. Now, in option two, the backstop date for the 21-22 accounts is still the 31st of March 2024. So the inference I draw is that government are intending that we just close off the 21-22 accounts with a good run at it, so there's still quite a few months to come. But again, my inference from that is that there won't be an awful lot of audit time released as a result of that. So we're not going to see a surge in capacity in the next few months because people will still be working on closing out 21-22. Now again, back to option one. In that scenario, the backstop date for the 22-23 accounts that are prepared and are ready to audit would be September 2024. So that would give us 8 months if Hassan's teams were available to start from January. Now, you may think that gives us a good chance to get things done by that point, and we could get the audit concluded without a disclaimer, but I think there is risk in that scenario. In option two, the backstop date for the completion of the 22-23 accounts would be, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought, would be the 31st of March 2024. So next March. So you've got 3 months to conclude the 22-23 audit, which I just think is wholly unachievable. But I think the point being that that would be the sharpest shock that would allow you to close out and move on to 23-24. So essentially in both scenarios, they're looking to conclude 21-22, but then sacrifice 22-23 as a means of allowing audit time to move on to the 23-24 accounts. So once we've seen that guidance, we'll need to reflect on it internally. And I think from my perspective, what we'd be looking for is a scenario that allows us not to avoid nugatory effort. So the last thing we want to do is undertake a load of work with audit partners on the audit only first to fail and miss and end up with a disclaimer. So we don't want 8 months worth of effort going into auditing the 22-23 accounts only to end up with a disclaimer. So does option 2 look better in that scenario? And those are the things that we'll need to work through. So we're waiting on risks and guidance on this through the consultation, but I think things will happen quite quickly in the next few weeks. And once we've got that guidance, I think, Claire, if we can just send it round to the committee as soon as it lands. Just one thing, sorry, it'd be remiss of me not to say while we're all here, my thanks and appreciation to Simon and the team for all the work that they put into the 21-22 accounts. It's and the audit process. It's been a torturous process, but hopefully we're there and we've got the right result at the end of it. So thank you, Simon and team.
Thank you, Gareth.
I either leave it on all the time, forget to switch it off, or the other way around. I do apologise. It's my stupidity. Yeah, I get used to leaving it off in case there's feedback. That's my excuse. Okay, item 13, risk management monitoring report, please, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the risk management dashboard. It's in a similar format to what the committee have received before. It's kind of evolving every time I do this, depending on what's happening in the organisation. So I'll just draw your attention to section 2 in the cover report that just highlights some of the activity that's happened since the last report. So we've done some work in the system to reconfigure it to reflect the kind of slight reorganisation we've had with some teams within directorates, and that's reflected in the dashboard as well. We've started to do some risk kind of identification, risk refresh work with teams and directorates. It's about a year now since we first started to implement the framework, so I was tending to feel that we need to kind of refocus and refresh on risks. So we've started that piece of work, and that'll continue into the new year. And then also we've had a follow-up audit with our internal audit partners that looked at the recommendations from previous audits that were done on risk management by Grant Thornton. And we've also last week held the scoping meeting to look at the next risk management audit, and that's the scoping documents under development at the minute and will come through for sign off. So just moving on to the actual dashboard, Appendix A. You'll see that we've added 2 new corporate risks or strategic level risks, one around the investment zone that Tom came to talk to us about. Obviously that's a high profile piece of activity, so we've added a risk around that to make sure it's monitored, and then the risk around the concurrent kind of running of major change programs around Tram, potential PCC, which I'm sure we'll come on to. The highest scoring risks on the corporate strategic level risk just remain the same, bush recovery funding, Tram services and the net zero agenda. On Tram, I would just say we have done a piece of work where we've looked at the Tram programme risk register, which is aligned to the framework, so they're using the same approach, and looked at risks that we might need to escalate into this kind of reporting. We took that to ELB a couple of weeks ago for a discussion, and it's a discussion I need to just continue with Gareth, and probably see those come through into the next report. I'm happy to take any feedback on the format and the content of the dashboard, and obviously if you've got any specific questions around specific risks, then colleagues will help to answer those, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Claire, just on something which we picked up in the Transport Risk Working Group, are there 2 other new risks that have been identified through the reorganisation of the directorates? maybe they were new to the working group but not drawn out on the
Yes.
reference 156 and I think it was 154, was it? Regional policies, I think it was.
Yes, so the risk that you're referring to that we looked at transport working group, because previous reports that we'd taken to that group, we looked at operational transport and I think strategic development or something like that. And because we've reorganised and we've split that into the component teams, we then brought forward a couple of extra risks to that working group to make sure you're aware of those that we'd not previously included. So they weren't new risks to be monitored, but they were new to that working group.
Fine.
So
And
to
I
explain that.
think Tim's already referred to one of them, which is the application of regional policies and the inconsistencies we've got between sometimes local authority policies and where the combined authority is looking to move us. And that's something perhaps members need to keep in their minds as we go forward.
Any more for any more? Thank you very much. And we move on to Transport Risk Working Group. Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think quite a lot of what we covered on Monday we've already touched on here. We spoke about the Tram concession and bringing that in-house already. We just referred to a couple of other issues which we looked at in terms of the application of regional policies where there's a potential conflict between local authority and South Yorkshire MCA. The other points which we looked at were the other red risks that we considered were declining patronage, which we've been through on the franchising discussion, and also there are still some infrastructure risks within the Tram network which are the subject either of a remedial programme which will, I think that was the balance weights, was it, Tim? Thank you. Which will ultimately by 24-25 reduce that risk to an acceptable managed level. And then there was another question about some of the bridges which are the subject of further investigative work. We also touched briefly on Bernard Road, which is now implemented. The signals have been changed as we asked for and discussed at the last meeting in June. The one point which Tim rightly mentioned was that we are continuing to monitor driver behaviour at that particular crossing, because although we've changed the signals, if drivers don't change their behaviours, you can still get people running through red lights. So that's still being looked at, although it is closed and off our register. And I think that would be it that I would want to draw the committee's attention to.
Presumably, because I left it on. Presumably the police will be monitoring that driver behaviour as well, would they?
Yes, ultimately I think that's where you'd need enforcement against it. But it's an issue about what's their traffic policing priorities across South Yorkshire and resources, yeah.
The other way of dealing, or at least monitoring the issue, is reported incidents and near misses from the tram drivers themselves.
Yeah.
And not just at this junction, but more generally across the network. And again, we've left a legacy risk open that covers general risk of collision on the tramway, not just at Bernard Road. That remains open because it remains an open risk. But yeah, we'll continue to monitor the near miss reporting, which is habitual from Supertram.
And I think that also, Tim, reinforces the point you made earlier about the importance of safety now for the authority once it takes on board the tram operations itself.
No, indeed, and the other two risks that you mentioned around balance counterweights and the structures as well, in terms of safe operations of the system, when they become wholly MCA owned and operated, that all of those responsibilities fully lie with us, and as opposed to some of those being discharged through the current concession.
I'm I'm just going to take this opportunity to sneak in something which is relevant to a previous discussion as well. Dusseldorf. I just looked up the system in Dusseldorf, and on the internet they have a system of integrated ticketing, and so I think that's, you know, in the future we really ought to be looking at buses and trams and integrated ticketing, so you can switch from tram to bus and vice versa. Rheinbahn it's called.
In fact, just offer one quick comment on that, Chair. An integrating ticketing system does exist already by the name of Travelmaster in South Yorkshire. The challenge we have with Travelmaster is it is wholly owned by the bus and train and tram operators. So the MCA has no formal powers over that organisation and the products they choose to sell and the price they charge them at. Under a franchised environment, clearly all of the bus-related tickets associated with that would fall under the MCA, and indeed from next March, decisions purely about single tram tickets will fall also within the MCA's remit. So, you know, we may find ourselves in due course in a position when we've got much greater control over a multi-operator ticketing system in the future, but at the moment those powers are very limited, but it may well change. Commercially integrated only at this moment in time, yeah.
Oh, flipping heck. Yes.
Sorry, just to add to your comments, Chair. I think one of the things we can make advances on is communication with travellers. This morning, I bought a single ticket off the bus that lets me get on a tram, a train, or a bus across South Yorkshire. Brilliant, integrated, just show the ticket and that's it. And the other thing is, I think there's a lot of information now out on the internet where people can track where the buses are. So the point you were making earlier about people waiting at the bus stop, is it going to turn up? You can find that on your phone. And I think what we need is a bit more education, a few more YouTube videos or whatever to get that message out to people.
I'd wholly agree with that. I think, in addition to that, and again this is something that may become an investment opportunity under a franchise network, is better at stop information, so better real-time information at stop, better, more timely timetable information at stop as well, to give people confidence that when a bus says it's going to turn up, it will turn up on time.
Agreed, I think that's what you need. I just think if you can educate people that it's on the phone, they've got it wherever they are and they don't have to get to the bus stop. But anyway, that's a separate debate.
Completely agree, absolutely.
Is that integrated system South Yorkshire wide?
The ticketing system is South Yorkshire wide, yes.
Right.
We are in the process of developing online tools that allow you to do an awful lot of what Paul has just described as well.
Just exploring the gaps in my knowledge here. And if I don't know about it, lots of people in Barnsley don't.
I think the point about communication is absolutely key in this. Raising general levels of awareness with the public is important.
And the other thing is, I've rung the number on the bus stops on several occasions when buses haven't appeared, and I've waited forever, and I just haven't had anything.
I know you're time pressure today,
Yes.
but in
Well,
5 minutes.
In 5 minutes.
All right. At some point, I'll show you what you can do without ringing a number, and I think you'll be amazed.
Right.
So I know about the South Yorkshire scheme, but there's lots of choices you have to make. I sort of tend to. I mean, at one point, I had different bus companies serving my local area at different times of the day, and maybe I'm too much of a value for money person. The point about Dusseldorf, you don't have to think about any of those. You just fully integrated systems. You don't have to think about any of that. You just turn up, buy your ticket. Sometimes you have to know how long it lasts for, 90 minutes or all day or whatever, but basically you don't have to think about anything else to come do your journey. You just, you just buy your ticket in some sort of way, which I'm sure now would be on your phone for most people, and that's it.
Sorry, I'm going to hand over to... and now I start shouting. Don't have to worry about that anymore. David.
Thank you, Chair. Next item, item 15, Governance Improvement Plan. Is that you, Claire?
Thank you. So this is the regular kind of monitoring report that we bring to committee to track the progress of the governance improvement plan that's created as part of the annual governance review each year. So the updates are provided by the relevant areas in the organisation and the directors, and this report then goes via our executive board for review before it comes to committee. So I'll just bring your attention to Appendix A. Where we have something that's indicated on the RAG rating as amber, that's showing that it's in progress. There's one on there that's highlighted as red, and that relates to information asset registers. This is something that's been on the governance improvement plan for the last couple of years, and I think it's about the resource that we've had to do that piece of work. It is picked up as part of the cyber security audit later in the meeting, so we'll come back to it at that point if that's okay.
Thank you. I've got just a couple of questions and then open to everyone else. The last three actions of the government improvement plan in the comments, it's not giving me a lot of sense of timescale in those. So it would be useful to have, document is awaiting union and HR review, but by when? Following the outcome of the cyber security review, be rolled into internal audit. By when? The corporate document library is partially populated again. When are we going to fully populate? So don't need to answer them now, but it'd be useful to have those in the comments so we can get timescale on them. Questions from anybody else?
Thank you. No, I'd back you up on that, David. I think timescales are helpful because reading the comments, there's some of those which have probably been done already. So the RAG rating would be different from amber to green. Otherwise, yeah, I'm quite happy to leave it to the cyber security discussion this afternoon or later.
Yeah, I'll bring that through next time. I'll make sure we ask the contributors to the report to highlight that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? I'm not seeing anybody else's hands. Right. Okay. In which case.
Yeah, sorry, this is just a verbal update. No matters to report to the committee.
Thank you. I'm guessing no questions on that. No. Right. Okay. Thank you. Work plan.
Thank you. Again, this is just the regular report, keeping everyone on track with where we're going with the agenda for each meeting. Just a couple of things to know. We did have PCC update on this agenda for today, and it's highlighted on each agenda coming up in December and then into March. We didn't bring it forward today, but I understand that there is an informal session set aside for members, and you've received an invitation to take you through some of that. I'm not sure if Gareth wants to provide any brief update at this point in time, or whether you're satisfied to wait for that briefing, which is on the 27th, and then we will bring something forward next time. No? No? Okay.
Any questions from anybody? Oh.
Two suggestions from me to the committee to include. One would be, could we have a briefing on our controls and procedures for responding to FOIs in the light of the various problems that have occurred at other organisations, just to view as to how do we respond to them. Is there a central process? Is there a review before an answer goes out? Will be one. And then the second one, again, thinking about lessons learned elsewhere, and we'll need to see the various authority reports on those matters. But when you think about some of the spectacular failings and breakdowns in controls that there's been at other authorities, do we just need to have a look at that as part of our overview to ensure we've got the right governance here? Will be my suggestions.
Yeah, I think that might be quite helpful actually. So obviously there's been a number of significant failures in authorities across the country, and just being able to quickly test what's happened there and whether we have exposure ourselves probably would be quite a helpful exercise for us.
Any further questions? Phone, the microphone on. Our next item is internal audit. Over to internal audit colleagues.
Thank you. So the first report we have is our progress report. This provides an update of the internal audit activities since the last audit committee. So since then we've issued our two reports in final, which are the cyber risk assessment report and the follow-up audit. Both of those are kind of next on the agenda items, so I don't propose to kind of go into those now. In terms of other internal audit activity, the next couple of audits we've got the Tram health check and purchasing and creditors. Those two audits are scheduled, and the planning meeting and scoping document has been issued. The bus data quality framework internal audit fieldwork has completed, and the draft report has been issued, and that's with management. And then risk management, which is scheduled for the end of October. We had that scoping meeting last week, and the scoping document is due out this week. I think the only other thing to highlight for internal audit is we have the governance internal audit scheduled for January. However, discussions with management, we are proposing to just move that back to maybe March instead. So it'll still be in the 23-24 work programme. It's just, it'll give a bit more time for some of those changes to embed and give a kind of a wider sample base for us to kind of look at those details. So I just wanted to bring that to committee's attention and make sure that you're comfortable with that proposal. And then the rest of the progress report really is provides just an update of some of the briefings we've sent out to management on kind of local sector changes, and also it details our kind of key performance indicators, which I'm happy to report are in line with our contract. And that's all I was going to pull out for the progress report really. I'm happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I've just got, you know, a couple of comments, which is one, pleased that you're looking on track. And I know we had a conversation earlier, and you know, you were saying you're getting good cooperation and access to officers, which, given the amount of pressures officer under, I think we're all very grateful for. So a thank you to officers for prioritising audit at a time when you've all got lots of other things in your lives. So we're grateful to that. And obviously cyber we're going to talk about later, and follow-up we're going to talk about later, and those are the two things I'd pulled out of this. Comments or questions from anybody else? Okay, so next item is follow-up.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just take you guys through the follow-up report briefly. So what I'll do initially is just to talk about how we do a follow-up, because it is slightly different to how you've had follow-up audits done in the prior years. So what we've done is there's two follow-ups planned for this year. One's been completed and reported here, and then there's another one for later in the year around February time, March I think it is, to relook at these. So what we do is we take all actions that are due at the time of the audit from all previous audits. So anything with a due date at the start of the audit we'll look at. So rather than doing specific audits to follow up, you know, the specific audits that have been done before, we just cover them all at the same time. So we speak to all the officers involved who are the owners, and we get evidence, or we do additional testing to confirm that those actions have now been complete. Where they're not complete, we assess the progress, and where they're completely haven't been started, we put the rationale in and we agree new dates, new actions, and get that commitment again from owners. So this report itself, so if I take you through to the second page, which has the table itself, so these were all the areas that we followed up against. So all these had actions due at the time of the audit. So there was 19 in total at the time of the audit. 12 had been fully implemented. One was superseded due to control environment changing, so that was no longer relevant. And the remaining 6, we had 4 ongoing and 2 where no progress as such had been made. So for all of those 6, we've agreed new dates, new action with management. And I'll just highlight the 2 themselves that had no progress, shall we say, against them, both related to supplier resilience, but these have been delayed due to team restructures and also change in approach. So some of the initial actions weren't necessarily the route that was now being taken due to changes since that audit's actually been, that audit was undertaken. So again, the actions are slightly different to what they were initially, which is the new sort of commitment and actually the route that management are now taking. So all of those 6 will go into our tracking now, so that when they now become due at the next time, we'll then follow them up at that point. But overall, the progress made, we gave an opinion of reasonable progress, which is a positive opinion, which is a good start. And like I say, they'll go into the track now, so no actions will drop off. We'll pick them up as we go throughout the years. But I'll pause there for any questions on the follow-up itself.
Okay, thank you. I've got one specific. There's comments on the asset condition survey. The last one was in 2018, and it's now out of date. It's more a question for officers perhaps than you. How often do we think we should be doing asset condition surveys? Is it every 5 years, or is it every 5 years? Seemed a fair, quite a long time ago. Should it be a bit quicker than that? And what are we doing to get back on track?
Yeah, I think we were aiming for 5 years. So we're in the process of commissioning an asset condition survey across the entire estate right now, which feeds into the asset management plan that's referenced in this document. The only thing I would say is that we have commissioned ad hoc condition surveys as we've gone throughout that period as well, where we had pause for concern over certain points. So some of the committee members may remember a couple of years back, it might have been 2021, we had an internal audit conducted on the Advanced Manufacturing Park Technology Centre, which is one of our key assets up at Catcliffe in Rotherham, on the back of which we undertook a condition survey specifically on that site. So we have done things, just not the broad sweep, which is now underway.
Paul.
Thank you. Presumably the buildings SYMCA have got are all built post-RAC, and we haven't identified any problems in that.
It's an interesting one. I've asked the team to look into that. This all kicked off while I was on leave, so we've got the team working on it. We do know there were issues with concrete construction at Rotherham interchange in the past, which necessitated a complete rebuild. So that's one of the things.
They're in the car park, both and the car park and the interchange itself, yeah.
Did we do any work at the time, Tim? Because that was back in 2017.
2016, 17, all that.
Was there any work done to look at whether that was a systemic issue across other sites?
I'd have to go and check, I can't remember. The action that you've described is underway. I think these are just brief assurance, because DFT have asked us the same question actually, and we've asked Super Tram operations to do the same for their structures as well, given we're bringing those back under our control as well from March.
I mean, just to say that's obviously a very important area in current. So if we can have some assurance that we've picked up any buildings we've got that do have RAC in, that would be useful if we can note that for future committee, please. Any further questions from anybody? No? Okay, thank you. Right, the next item, I think we are going into private session. For members of the public watching, that's because it's a cybersecurity item and you don't want to advertise out publicly any weaknesses you might have in cybersecurity in case anybody watches and then tries to exploit them. So understandably, we're not putting that out in public. So the webcast will be paused at this point. Thank you. Right, thanks everyone. We're now back webcasting again. The final item is issues for escalation. I wasn't particularly noting these before I took over as chair, but what I've got down, not necessarily escalation, but I don't know whether Gareth wants to let the board know anything on the EA timetable and all the implications there. And things for follow-up future meetings, I've got the RAC check, cyber follow-up, and I think perhaps a very short paper on our response to FOIs and making sure we don't leak any data. I may have missed something out there, so I'm happy to take any suggestions from anyone else, or issues we need to escalate or anything else we needed for future meetings. Anybody? No. Right, in which case I'll thank you all for coming and close the meeting. Thank you.